Welcome. Tonight, we take a gentle journey not through time as it's written in history books, but through the deeper paths, the ones carved in symbol, myth, and memory. This is the story of an ancient place, an island kissed by the Mediterranean sun, and a legend that has echoed for thousands of years. You may think you know the myth of the Minotaur, the beast in the maze, the sword-wielding hero, the betrayed princess. But tonight, we walk the spiral differently, slower, softer, listening not for monsters, but for meaning. This is the Labyrinth of Crete, not just a place, but an invitation to remember what was lost, to feel what has always been there, and perhaps to find something waiting in the center that isn't what you feared, but what you've been searching for. So settle in, let your breath slow, let the mind soften, and step quietly with me into the spiral. Long before the world was mapped and seas were charted, before myths became stories and stories became legend, there was an island, Crete, cradled in the heart of the Mediterranean. It was a land of towering mountains and olive groves, of sun-drenched coasts and whispers carried by the wind. And within this ancient world stood a city that defied the imagination. Knossos, a palace so vast, so intricate, that those who entered claimed it could never be fully known. They said it was a labyrinth, not merely a building, but a living enigma, hiding something deep within its heart. The myth speaks of a monstrous creature, half man, half bull, born of sin and divine punishment, kept locked away in the shadows of the labyrinth. This was the Minotaur, a symbol of fear and power, a creature so terrifying that even kings bowed before the will of its keeper, King Minos. But myths, like dreams, are layered, and beneath the beast's snarling face and the hero Theseus's shining sword, something else waits. A truth obscured by time and twisted by the hands of storytellers. To understand the legend, we must step backward into a world where gods and mortals walked the same earth, where rituals bound heaven to soil, and where the bull was not a monster, but a symbol of divine energy. The Minoans, the people of Crete, were not savages clinging to superstition. They were architects of elegance, masters of the sea, and visionaries of technology and art. Their society flourished, while others still fumbled in darkness. Their palaces had plumbing, their art spoke in color and motion, and their religion pulsed with meaning that we only now begin to glimpse. At the center of this world stood the bull, sacred, powerful, eternal. It danced in their frescoes, leapt through rings of fire, and stood guard at the gates of the underworld. The act of bull leaping, depicted in vibrant murals, was not mere sport. It was ceremony, perhaps even communion. The participants, both male and female, were initiates, acrobats of the spirit, engaging with the divine. In this light, the Minotaur ceases to be a monster and becomes a distorted echo of something once revered. Was there ever a beast at all, or was the labyrinth guarding something far more profound? The very word labyrinth comes from labrys, a double-headed axe used in Minoan rituals, especially those involving the bull. The Palace of Knossos, with its endless corridors and twisting passages, was more than a dwelling. It was a temple, perhaps even a map of the cosmos. Its design seemed to mirror the spiraling patterns of nature, the coils of a snail's shell, the turning of the seasons, the motion of the stars. Moving through its halls may not have been about reaching a center, but becoming centered, transforming the self. This reframes the myth entirely. If the labyrinth was not a prison, but a place of initiation, then the story of the Minotaur becomes one of misunderstanding, or perhaps deliberate misdirection. Theseus, the hero of Athens, arrives to slay the beast, yet in doing so, does he end a terror or extinguish a mystery? The thread of Ariadne, guiding him through the maze, might symbolize more than cleverness. It may represent the fragile line between understanding and fear, between reverence and violence. And what of Ariadne herself, daughter of Minos, giver of the thread? She is often reduced to a supporting role, abandoned by Theseus as he sails away to glory. But what if she was never meant to be a tragic figure? What if she was the true guardian of the labyrinth's secret? A priestess, perhaps, or a guide into the sacred unknown. Her thread was not simply to lead out of danger, but to bind the seeker to a path, one that could not be navigated by sword alone. Archaeology has unearthed much from the ruins of Knossos: elaborate plumbing systems, colorful murals, storerooms filled with ancient offerings. But what we have not found is a monster. No bones, no prison cells, no signs of carnage. Instead, we find a culture obsessed with symbols: the bowl, the spiral, the double axe. It is as if they were telling a story, not through words, but through stone and color. A story that required the viewer to feel, not just see. Perhaps the legend of the Minotaur is not a tale of horror, but a warning of what happens when sacred truths are misunderstood, when conquerors rewrite history to suit their victories. Athens, the rising power of the time, may have needed to frame Crete's mysteries as threats to justify its own rise. And so, the temple became a prison, the ritual a sacrifice, the sacred bull a monster, and the labyrinth a trap instead of a path to transcendence. As the centuries passed, the myth twisted further, carried by poets and philosophers, reshaped for new audiences, until only the shadow remained. A beast in the dark, slain by a hero who knew not what he destroyed. To truly grasp the enigma of the labyrinth, we must imagine what it felt like to walk those halls, not as a tourist or a scholar, but as an initiate. Picture the air thick with the scent of burning herbs, torches flickering along walls painted with divine scenes, each step echoing through stone passages that seemed to pulse with unseen energy. This was not just architecture, it was intention. Every curve, every corridor, guiding the soul inward. The Minoans understood something we have nearly forgotten: that space itself can change the mind. That movement, through designed patterns, mirrors the movement of spirit through understanding. When one entered Knossos, it was not merely to find a room, but to undergo a shift. The deeper one went, the more detached from the outer world they became. until, at the heart, perhaps the initiate confronted a presence, not a monster, but an awakening. And so, the Minotaur, as a creature, may never have lived in flesh, but, as a symbol, it was alive in every ritual, in every carved image of horned beings, in every dance performed in moonlit courtyards. In some depictions, horned figures stand with open arms, calm expressions. Nothing like the savage image painted by later myths. These figures seem at peace, guardians perhaps, or ancestors. The bull's horns, forming a crescent, may have been tied to the moon, the cycles of birth and death, the mysteries of feminine power. This opens a door into another possible truth, that the labyrinth's secret was not one of terror, but transformation. The darkness of the maze was not a threat, but a womb. And the Minotaur, the fusion of man and bull, was not a punishment, but a symbol of unity, animal and divine, male and female, darkness and light. All aspects brought together in one figure. In such a reading, Theseus's sword becomes not a tool of salvation, but a blade that severs understanding. The Greeks told stories for reasons, often political, often personal. And in casting the Minoans as monstrous, they elevated their own narrative. They placed themselves at the center of rational thought, heroic virtue, and divine order, while painting older cultures as chaotic, decadent, and dangerous. But history does not always reward truth. It rewards the storyteller. And so, the deeper meanings of the labyrinth were buried beneath rubble and ruin, beneath myth and metaphor. Yet fragments remain, frescoes showing young men vaulting over bulls with grace and precision, statuettes of goddesses holding serpents, with eyes wide open as if seeing beyond the veil, ceremonial axes carved with symbols we still struggle to decode. These are not relics of fear, but echoes of reverence. They hint at a worldview where humanity did not stand apart from nature, but flowed with it, where ritual was not empty repetition, but a language of the cosmos. The goddess who stood at the center of Minoan worship was no distant deity watching from above. She was present, immanent, embodied in the earth, the moon, the mountain, often depicted with snakes coiled in her hands and feline creatures by her side. She radiated power, balance, and mystery. Some scholars refer to her simply as the snake goddess, but her identity was likely more layered than any modern label can capture. She was the guardian of cycles, the weaver of fate, and perhaps the original presence at the heart of the labyrinth. The presence of feminine power in Minoan art is unmistakable. Women appear not as passive onlookers, but as central figures, leading ceremonies, engaging in bull leaping, presiding over sacred spaces. It is as if the entire civilization danced to a rhythm both sensual and spiritual, guided by the mysteries of life and death, creation and return. In such a world, the labyrinth could have been a symbolic journey through the womb of the goddess herself, a descent into the darkness of unknowing, followed by a rebirth into light. This cyclical vision of existence was at odds with the rising linear philosophies of mainland Greece, where history had a beginning and an end, and conquest became destiny. As Crete fell into decline, either through natural disaster, foreign invasion, or internal collapse, its rituals began to fade. But rather than disappearing, they were digested by the cultures that followed, altered, adapted, and repurposed. The myth of the Minotaur may have been the result of this transformation, a misunderstood inheritance wrapped in fear and control. The palace of Knossos, once vibrant with color and life, slowly turned to ruin. Earthquakes cracked its walls, flames licked its pillars, time wore down its edges. But still, its layout speaks volumes. Rooms branch into rooms, stairways rise and fall like shifting thoughts, and light wells open into spaces that seem suspended between worlds. It was a place to get lost, and perhaps that was the point, to lose the self in order to find the sacred. And the deeper we look, the stranger things become. Beneath Knossos lies a network of caves, natural caverns that were believed to house deities and spirits. These caves, like the labyrinth above them, played host to initiations, perhaps even visionary experiences. Echoes of chanting, the flicker of oil lamps, the scent of resin and wine. It's not difficult to imagine pilgrims descending into these depths in search of revelation. And at the center of it all may have stood the image of the bull, not to be feared, but to be understood. Even the name Minos, given to the king of Crete, might not refer to a single person, but to a title, like Pharaoh or Caesar. The historical Minos may have been many individuals, rulers, priests, or ceremonial figures, tasked with maintaining the delicate balance between the visible and invisible worlds. The Minotaur, in this context, could represent a misunderstood rite of passage, something enacted, not told, experienced, not explained. A drama of rebirth carried out within the spiraling arms of the labyrinth. If Theseus's arrival marks the intrusion of reason upon mystery, then Ariadne's thread might be the last bridge between the two. A thin, fragile line stretching from the sacred to the profane, from the knowing to the merely clever. And once that line is severed, once the sword replaces the spiral, the world changes. The goddess retreats. The ritual is lost. The labyrinth is silenced. But even silence has its rhythms, and the stones remember. Every excavation brings forth new questions. An ivory figurine, a fragment of script, a mural flaking with age but glowing still with color. Linear A, the undeciphered script of the Minoans, guards its secrets tightly, whispering through time in symbols we cannot yet read. Perhaps it is not a language for the mind, but for the spirit, a song composed in architecture, ritual, and movement. And so, the legend of the Minotaur endures, not because it is a tale of horror, but because something in it calls to us, a memory, too old for language, a pull toward a truth we can sense but not name. It is not the beast that draws us, but the shape of the maze, the spiral that matches the coiling of DNA, the arms of galaxies, the motion of waves. The labyrinth is more than myth. It is a mirror. Imagine now the experience of entering the labyrinth, not in fear, but in reverence. The wide corridors hum softly with energy. The echo of sandals on stone becomes a rhythmic heartbeat. Incense floats through the air, and painted dolphins swim above you in murals, as if guiding your passage through sacred water. Light and shadow play together, revealing faces in the walls, symbols carved with care into thresholds. You are not alone. You are watched, not by eyes, but by presence, something ancient and vast. The deeper you go, the more the outside world dissolves. Time loses meaning. You pass rooms filled with offerings, stone vessels, painted eggs, polished bones, laid in deliberate patterns. Perhaps you kneel. Perhaps you speak the old names aloud. Perhaps you are met by a figure in horns, not an animal, not a man, but something in between. It does not speak. It only watches. It waits for you to understand. This is the heart of the labyrinth, not a place to slay but to surrender, to let go of the stories, the roles, the masks, and stand naked before the mystery. This is what the myth hides, not a monster, but a mirror. Theseus, in his triumph, may have missed the point entirely, and perhaps that was the true tragedy. Outside the labyrinth, the world moves forward. Empires rise, philosophers debate, temples are built to honor logic and law. But beneath it all, the spiral waits. The ruins of Knossos remain not just as stones, but as questions. What did the Minoans know? What did they feel when they danced with bulls, when they passed through the womb-like halls, when they honored the goddess in the dark of the cave? Perhaps it is no accident that the myth of the labyrinth still resonates. In dreams, we wander through strange corridors. In our minds, we face shadows we cannot name. In our lives, we seek meaning in winding paths that seem to lead us back to where we began. The labyrinth is not just in Crete, it is in us and the Minotaur. Whatever it may be, waits not to devour us, but to awaken us. The story continues, not in stone, but in breath. As the myth filtered through time, retold by wandering poets, and reshaped by new philosophies, the sacred gradually became profane. The bull-headed figure, once carved with reverence into clay and stone, became a warning, a creature to be vanquished, a punishment for hubris. But this transformation reveals more about the storytellers than the story itself. To those who no longer walked the paths of ritual, the symbols lost their language. They saw monsters where their ancestors had seen mysteries. In this way, history folds in on itself. The further we travel from the original meaning, the more the layers accumulate. Each new retelling adds distance, a veil of misunderstanding, until the original vision becomes a shadow. But the labyrinth waits, silent and patient, offering its spiral path to any who dare return, not to slay the beast, but to listen to it, to ask what it remembers. In the ancient world, initiation was not a metaphor. It was a passage, demanding surrender, discipline, and courage. Those who entered sacred spaces did so with intention. They fasted, they chanted, they walked barefoot into darkness. The journey through the labyrinth might have required such preparations. It may have mimicked the descent into death, a symbolic act of shedding one's former self, and at the heart, in that silent chamber, a moment of union with the divine. What did the Minotaur represent in this context? Perhaps It was the final test. Not a fight, but a recognition. The face of the animal, fierce, powerful, may have mirrored the initiate's own fears, but once faced, it transformed, not into a monster, but into a guide. Just as ancient shamans wore the skins of beasts to become them, the Minotaur may have been a costume, or a role, part of an ancient play enacted for the soul's awakening. Ariadne's role, too, shifts in this light. No longer a love-struck daughter aiding her lover, she becomes the high priestess, the weaver of paths. Her thread is a lifeline, not out of danger, but back from transcendence. The initiate, having undergone the sacred ordeal, must return to the world, and it is Ariadne who holds that knowledge. The art of re-entry, of remembering the way back from the edge of dissolution. But the Greek version of the story ends with abandonment. Theseus sails away, leaving Ariadne behind. In some tellings, she dies alone. In others, she is rescued by Dionysus, the god of ecstasy and madness, the patron of altered states. This detail is not incidental. It suggests that those who enter the labyrinth and truly see its secret may not return unchanged. Some become wanderers, poets, prophets, madmen. Others become visionaries. There is something timeless in this, the tension between order and chaos, between the known and the unknowable. The Greeks, in their age of rationalism, codified knowledge, sought definition. The Minoans, in contrast, seem to have embraced ambiguity. Their art is fluid, their rituals theatrical, their architecture disorienting. Perhaps they understood that truth does not live in straight lines. And now, as we examine the ruins of Knossos, as we decipher the spirals on ceramic jars and trace the patterns of ancient pathways, we begin to sense what they may have known. That life is not a march, but a dance. That wisdom is not accumulated, but remembered. That the labyrinth is not a riddle to be solved, but a path to be walked again and again. Far from being isolated, the Minoans were at the heart of a vast network of cultural exchange. Their ships, swift and elegant, cut through the Mediterranean, reaching Egypt, the Levant, even the distant shores of Italy. Their symbols traveled with them: bulls, spirals, the double axe, seeding ideas in faraway lands. In turn, they absorbed motifs from others, creating a rich tapestry of beliefs that transcended boundaries. Within this cosmopolitan world, the labyrinth stood as more than local lore. It became a symbol that resonated across cultures. In Egypt, sacred paths wound through temple complexes, mimicking the journey of the sun through night and day. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats rose in spirals toward the heavens. Even the Celts carved labyrinths into stones and turf, pathways meant for walking, not escaping. The motif repeats again and again, as if humanity itself carries the spiral deep within its memory. Could it be that the labyrinth is not merely Cretan, that it echoes something older still, a primal architecture of the spirit? Some have speculated that the myth predates the Minoans, inherited from Neolithic peoples who carved spirals into tombs and danced around bullstones beneath star-strewn skies. If so, the palace at Knossos was not the beginning, but a magnificent expression of something much older, And the Minotaur, that half-human guardian of the center, becomes not an aberration, but a sacred archetype, a symbol of duality reconciled. Horns meet mind, instinct meets intellect, nature meets culture. It stands at the heart of the spiral, not to frighten, but to challenge. To say, are you ready to know who you really are? To walk the labyrinth is to say, yes. Yes to unknowing. Yes to descent. Yes to transformation. And perhaps the ancient ones knew that not everyone was ready. That is why the path was protected, shrouded in secrecy, and guarded by symbols that only the initiated could understand. It was not about hiding truth, but preserving its power. Today, replicas of the labyrinth can be found across the world. In cathedrals, parks, gardens, people walk them slowly, meditatively, feeling their minds quiet as the turns pull them inward. They may not know the full story, may never have heard of Knossos or Ariadne or the snake goddess, but they feel something. A pull, a whisper. That is the genius of the labyrinth. It speaks without words. The Minotaur myth is perhaps a distorted echo of that voice. A warning, yes, but also an invitation. What we call a monster may simply be a mystery we refuse to understand. What we call a hero may be someone who fails to listen. And what we call a myth may be a memory of a world that once was, or might still be, just beneath the surface of things. The ruins of Knossos, though weathered and worn, still carry an energy that defies decay. Archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans, who excavated the site in the early 20th century, was struck by its majesty. He named the culture Minoan, after the legendary king Minos. Yet even he sensed that the truth behind the myth was more intricate than the tales preserved by Greek authors. As Evans uncovered frescoes, pillars, and intricate rooms, he began to reconstruct a world that pulsed with art, ceremony, and encoded knowledge. But even Evans, with all his enthusiasm, left his mark upon the myth. His reconstructions, though well-intentioned, imposed modern visions upon ancient ruins. Painted columns were replaced, staircases rebuilt, scenes reimagined. What we now see at Knossos is part fact, part fantasy. It is a dream of the past, filtered through the lens of someone seeking coherence, in a site designed, perhaps, to challenge that very impulse. The labyrinth was not meant to be decoded, but experienced. And still, even amid this blending of eras, certain truths rise. The frescoes speak in vibrant silence. There is no other site quite like Knossos, where walls are adorned not with conquest, but with nature. Dolphins leaping over waves, lilies blooming in profusion, women with flowing skirts and serpents twined through their fingers. The images feel alive. They invite not domination, but dance. They tell of a people who did not see themselves apart from the world, but within it, as participants in a cosmic rhythm. One of the most haunting images is that of the so-called Priest King fresco, a youthful figure wearing a crown of lilies, moving with grace and confidence. His identity remains unknown, yet he seems to embody something central to the Minoan ethos. Not a warrior, not a tyrant, but a mediator, a conduit between worlds. Perhaps this was the true role of Minos, not as a king in the modern sense, but as a keeper of balance, a guardian of the threshold. That threshold, the space between myth and reality, between conscious and unconscious, was guarded by the labyrinth itself. Within its turns, linear time dissolves. One can easily imagine a pilgrim walking those paths not to arrive anywhere, but to lose the burden of the outer world. In that winding silence, something awakens, a remembering, a return. The myth of the Minotaur may be frightening only because we have forgotten how to meet the sacred on its own terms. In a world obsessed with clarity and conquest, the idea of entering a maze with no clear end is unsettling. But the Minoans may have known what mystics have whispered through ages, that the soul needs to wander, that in getting lost, we are found. There are layers upon layers to the story, and not all are visible through ruins alone. Folklore lingers where history fades. On Crete, in its hills and caves, old tales still circulate about hidden chambers beneath the earth, about spirits that guard ancient wisdom, about sounds heard where no footfalls echo. These are not mere ghost stories. They are echoes, fragments, embers of a fire once tended by careful hands. The caves beneath the palace of Knossos were not incidental. They were sacred long before the first stone was laid. In the Dictaean cave, to the east, it was said that Zeus himself was born. Nurtured by nymphs, protected from his father Cronus, the infant god cried and laughed in darkness, in the womb of the world. These caves, like the labyrinth, represent more than shelter. They are places of origin, of transformation, of return. And here, the image of the bull returns once more. The bull is not merely Minoan. It is one of the oldest sacred animals in human culture. From Lascaux to Catalhoyuk, its form appears again and again. Strong, fertile, unstoppable. A creature that embodies both the wild and the divine. In some traditions, the bull was a solar animal, connected to the cycles of the sun, its horns representing the crescent moon, a duality that held the sky together. In the myth, Queen Pasiphae, Minos' wife, is said to fall in love with a bull sent by the gods. From this union, the Minotaur is born, a grotesque origin, or so the later Greeks claimed. But step back, and a different picture emerges. Pasiphae was not merely a queen, she was a priestess, a figure of immense symbolic power. Her union with the bull may have been a reenactment of an older sacred rite, misunderstood and rebranded by later cultures that had lost the language of symbol. In ancient rites across the Near East, divine union between priestess and animal king was not taboo, but essential. It signified fertility, abundance, the merging of forces. To modern minds, these images disturb, but to ancient eyes, they were keys, opening the doors to mysteries we now barely sense. The Minotaur, then, might not be a curse, but a bridge, a being born of union, destined to guide those who dared enter the spiral. What if the true story of the Minotaur is not about fear, but memory? A memory of a time when humans walked with the sacred, when the gods were not above us, but within us, when the halls of Knossos echoed not with screams, but with chants, and the flicker of lamplight danced across walls that pulsed with life. What if the creature at the center of the labyrinth was never a threat, but a question, one we are still trying to answer? The path continues, deeper and deeper, not toward danger, but toward awakening. To understand the labyrinth is to abandon the need for straight lines, for certainty. The Minoans did not build with symmetry in mind, at least not in the classical Greek sense. Their architecture flows like a living organism, expanding where needed, twisting into unexpected alcoves, rising and falling with the terrain. Rooms open into other rooms with no predictable pattern. Light enters from above in silent shafts, and colors shift from red to blue to gold with the movement of the sun. This fluidity is echoed in their art. There is motion everywhere. People in mid-leap, dolphins in flight beneath the waves, spirals carved into pottery as if capturing the rhythm of breath. This was not a culture frozen in monuments. It was one that pulsed with presence. And within that presence, the labyrinth was more than stone. It was an idea, a process, a place where transformation took root. The word labyrinth itself, as many scholars have noted, connects to the term labrys, the double-headed axe. This was no ordinary tool. In Minoan imagery, the labrys appears in sacred context, setched into walls, held by priestesses, offered in ritual. It represented balance, duality, perhaps even the twin currents of life and death. The labyrinth, then, may have been the house of the labrys, the space in which duality is confronted and harmonized. If we imagine an initiate walking through the maze, each turn becomes a moment of choice, of reflection. The path is not random. It is guided by unseen principles. As the traveler moves deeper, the outer world fades. The social self, the expectations, the roles all begin to dissolve. By the time they reach the center, something new has formed. Not a different person, but a clearer one. And it is there, in that still point, that the Minotaur waits. Not as a beast to battle, but as a mirror. To confront the Minotaur is to see what one has denied, the raw, untamed self, the part that remembers what the mind forgets. In this reading, the hero is not the one who kills, but the one who understands. The Minotaur does not need to die. It needs to be integrated. But in the myth, Theseus draws his sword. He follows the thread, enters the center, and slays the creature. He emerges into daylight, victorious, and yet the story is tinged with sorrow. Ariadne left behind. The labyrinth silenced. The wisdom within reduced to a cautionary tale. Was the hero's victory then truly a triumph? Or was it a tragedy disguised as glory? In a deeper sense, perhaps Theseus did not fail because he killed the Minotaur, but because he failed to understand what the Minotaur represented. He followed the thread to the heart of mystery, but brought with him only a blade. And that, perhaps, is the lesson that echoes through time, that not every unknown is an enemy, that not every guardian is a threat, and that sometimes the center of the maze is not a monster, but the truth we've long forgotten. Across cultures and centuries, the image of the labyrinth persists. It surfaces in the intricate knotwork of Celtic stones, in the meditative paths of medieval cathedrals, in the sacred mandalas of the East. Its spiral form appears in the chambers of the human heart, in the unfolding of ferns, in the spin of galaxies. Something in us responds to this shape, as if we are drawn back again and again to its quiet invitation. In Crete, that invitation once had a name. It was whispered in the rustling of olive trees, in the chant of priestesses, in the soft rhythm of bare feet against cool stone. The Minoans did not write epics. Their language remains mostly unread, but their world speaks through symbols, through spaces designed not to be seen all at once, but discovered step by step. As if each corner turned was a lesson, each passage a reflection. The myth, as it has come down to us, is a fragment of this greater pattern, a shard of stained glass from a shattered window. It tells us of power and punishment, love and betrayal, monsters and heroes. But it does not tell the whole story. It cannot, because the real journey was never about Theseus or Minos or even Ariadne. It was about the soul's movement toward wholeness. Consider how the story changes when told from another angle, when Ariadne is not a girl betrayed, but a guide misunderstood, when the Minotaur is not a horror, but a guardian of ancient wisdom, when the labyrinth is not a prison, but a sacred path through inner transformation. Suddenly, the myth begins to unfold, like a spiral, revealing new meanings with every turn. In this vision, the labyrinth is not something to escape, but something to enter willingly. And the thread, that delicate line, offered by Ariadne, becomes a symbol of memory, of connection. It reminds us of the way back, not to the world we left, but to the parts of ourselves we abandoned along the way. And what of the bull? Still, it returns. In dreams, in ritual, in the thrum of blood beneath the skin. In many ancient cultures, the bull's breath was said to carry the soul, its roar to echo the voice of the gods. To face the bull was not to face death, but life, raw, undiluted, and eternal. The Minotaur, then, is a symbol of that life force made visible, given shape, enclosed in mystery. Even today, as we stand among the ruins of Knossos, it is easy to feel something beneath the surface, a stirring, a presence, as if the stones themselves are watching, waiting. They do not speak in words, but if you listen closely, they hum, a low, steady sound, like breath in the dark, like a heart beating at the center of the world. In the centuries that followed the fall of the Minoan civilization, memory became myth, and myth hardened into allegory. The Greeks, whose rising influence reshaped the narratives of the Mediterranean, took the story of the labyrinth and refashioned it to fit their worldview. They reduced a sacred journey into a heroic conquest, a spiritual guardian into a fearsome beast, and a priestess guide into a discarded lover. In doing so, they cast a long shadow over the deeper meanings hidden in the tale. Yet beneath the Greek retellings, echoes of something older persist. The name Ariadne itself hints at ancient roots. It may derive from the Cretan form Arihang, meaning utterly pure. Such a name was likely not random. It pointed to a figure of high importance, perhaps even divinity. In later myths, Dionysus marries Ariadne and crowns her with stars, placing her among the constellations. Is this the echo of her original role? As a celestial priestess, a weaver of cosmic paths, a bridge between heaven and earth. Even the moment of her abandonment on Naxos takes on symbolic weight. Perhaps it was not a tragedy of romance, but a stage in the journey of spiritual initiation. The seeker Theseus, having completed the rite, cannot remain with the guide. He must return to the world, changed, and she, no longer needed in the realm of action, ascends to a higher plane. Myths are layered, and the more we look, the more the layers unfold. Returning to Knossos, we see signs everywhere that ritual and myth were not separate things, but woven into the fabric of daily life. Storage rooms held offerings, not only grain and oil, but figurines, shells, and carved stones. The throne room, with its mysterious basin and frescoes of griffins, was not a political chamber, but a place of ceremony. Water may have played a key role here, perhaps, for purification, perhaps for vision. The whole palace functioned like a living temple, one that breathed in time with the seasons. And always, the bull returns. In one of the most iconic frescoes, young acrobats leap over a charging bull in a gesture of grace and courage. This was not a sport of spectacle. It was sacred. The participants were not victims or daredevils. They were dancers in a cosmic drama. The bull was not the enemy. It was the axis, the center, the heart of the labyrinth made flesh. The Minotaur, then, may be the symbolic embodiment of this ancient ritual, a misunderstood deity, confined by time and tale to the shadows. Not a monster, but a memory. A symbol of what we once knew and now fear. He is the part of us we lock away, when we favor order over awe, when we fear the wild truths that live within. The spiral of the labyrinth offers a different path, one that circles inward, not to destroy, but to encounter, to face what we've hidden, to remember who we were before we forgot. In many ancient cultures, the act of entering sacred space was preceded by preparation, fasting, silence, ritual cleansing. These were not mere formalities, but ways to realign the body and mind with the subtle rhythms of the sacred. It is easy to imagine that those who walked the halls of Knossos did so with reverence, not rushing to find a room, but moving slowly, listening to the quiet language of architecture, light, and shadow. Labyrinths in other traditions follow the same principle. The path is long, but not meant to confuse. It guides gently, like a stream finding its way through rock. The turns are not obstacles, but invitations to slow down, to breathe, to let go. And at the center, there is often nothing, just space, emptiness, silence. But it is within that silence that the voice of the sacred begins to speak. The Greeks told us that the labyrinth was a prison, a place of terror and sacrifice. But perhaps that is a reflection of their fear, not of the beast, but of what it represented. The labyrinth challenges the linear mind. It asks us to let go of control, to trust in the journey. It offers no shortcuts, no clear end, only movement, inward, then outward again, like breath, like life itself. And what of the sacrifices said to be demanded by the Minotaur? 7 youths and 7 maidens, sent from Athens to Crete, a terrible price, paid in blood, or so the myth claims. But such numbers may not be literal. In sacred traditions, 7 is often symbolic of cycles, of initiation, of completeness. Perhaps the sacrifices were not victims at all, but initiates, chosen not to die, but to be transformed. It would not be the first time history turned sacred rites into scenes of horror. Again and again, in cultures across the globe, rites of passage have been rebranded as brutality by those who no longer understood them. What was once holy becomes profane. What was once guiding becomes feared. And the deeper meanings, encoded in symbol and song, are lost to time. Yet even now, we are drawn back. The myth of the labyrinth calls to something ancient in the human heart, a longing to return to the center, to face the unknown not with a blade, but with open eyes, to walk the path not as a conqueror, but as a seeker. The ruins remain, the stories survive, and within them the Minotaur waits, not in darkness, but in stillness, not as a warning, but as a whisper, reminding us that the way forward may begin by going inward, by stepping once more into the spiral. To gaze at the myth through modern eyes is to feel the tension between what was told and what was lost. We grow up with Theseus as a hero, bold and clever. But if we look closely, we find a young man who entered a place he did not understand, defeated a being he could not name, and left behind the only one who truly knew the path, Ariadne, abandoned. The labyrinth, silenced. The Minotaur, slain. But what if this story was not meant to end there? What if the real journey begins not with the sword, but with the silence that follows? The story of Ariadne's thread is perhaps the most enduring image of all. A single line, unbroken, leading inward and back again. It represents memory, intention, of trust. It is a fragile thing, easily lost, yet it binds the labyrinth together. Without it, Theseus would have perished not by the hands of the Minotaur, but by the maze itself. The thread is not just a tool, it is a symbol of connection between seeker and guide, between surface and depth, between past and future. And what does it mean that this thread came not from Theseus, but from Ariadne? She, not the hero, held the wisdom. She, not the warrior, understood the path. In many ways, the myth tells us something deeply ironic, that those who appear powerful are often blind, and those who are cast aside may hold the true key. It is a pattern we see not only in ancient stories, but in the world around us still. Knossos was not only a palace or a temple. It was a world in itself. Its halls may have echoed with chants. Its courtyards danced with moonlight and music. It may have hosted initiations that we can only begin to imagine, of journeys not of conquest, but of communion. The deeper one went, the more the outside world dissolved. Symbols replaced instructions. Movement replaced words. The spiral became the map. There are no great monuments to war in Minoan Crete. No vast armories, no victory steles, no glorified battle scenes on palace walls. Instead, there are dolphins and lilies, labyrinths and goddesses. This was not a culture obsessed with domination, but with harmony. That alone sets it apart in a world so often defined by conflict. Perhaps that is why it had to be reinterpreted, to fit into the rising ideologies of conquest and control. In retelling the Minotaur myth, perhaps the Greeks were not simply distorting, but wrestling with their own inheritance. They stood at the crossroads between the old ways and the new, between the spiral and the straight line, between sacred mystery and rational order. Theseus is not just a man, he is an age, a mentality, a shift. And the labyrinth becomes a symbol of what was left behind in that transition. But stories do not die, they transform. And beneath the layers of conquest and forgetfulness, the original pulse still beats. In dreams, in art, in the quiet steps of those who walk modern labyrinths in churches and gardens, the spiral still leads inward. The labyrinth is not about speed. It is about presence. Each turn is an invitation to slow down, to feel rather than think, to experience rather than analyze. That was the essence of the Minoan worldview, and immersion in the now. The sacred was not somewhere else. It was here. In the curves of a chamber, the flicker of a lamp, the sound of footsteps echoing through stone. There is something deeply human about the need to journey inward. Every culture has myths of descent into the earth, into caves, into underworlds. Orpheus, Inanna, Odysseus, even crystal descend before they rise. The labyrinth fits this pattern. It takes us down into the belly of the world, not to trap us, but to strip away what is no longer needed. In the center, we are raw, real, and from that still point, something new can emerge. If the Minotaur stands at that center, then it is not as executioner, but as mirror. His image is not meant to terrify, but to reflect. What part of ourselves have we locked away? What primal force? What instinct? What sacred wildness? The creature we fear may not be foreign at all. It may be the part of us we abandoned in the name of order, control, and reason. When Theseus raises his sword, he represents not only the physical hero, but the mental conqueror. He believes that truth can be claimed through force, but the labyrinth resists such certainty. It offers no direct path. It offers questions. And those who emerge unchanged have not truly walked its steps. There is a strange silence in the story after the Minotaur is slain. Theseus returns to Athens, but forgets to change his ship's sails from black to white. His father, King Aegeus, watches for his return, sees the black sails, and throws himself into the sea in despair. Even this detail carries the weight of sorrow. Victory tainted. Success stained by loss. The sea itself named after tragedy. What if the forgotten sail was not an accident, but a symbol? A sign that the journey through the labyrinth cannot end in triumph, only in transformation. And that in killing the Minotaur, something essential was lost, something Theseus could not name. The labyrinth, then, remains unfinished, not in architecture, but in meaning. It continues to live in us, calling us back to the spiral, to the center, to the thread. Ariadne's gift waits not in legend, but in practice. Every time we turn away from easy answers and choose instead to descend, to wander, to feel. And there, in the stillness, the ancient voice rises again, not in words, but in knowing. The presence of silence within the myth is perhaps the most powerful part of all. Myths often shout with the deeds of gods and kings, but this one whispers. It leaves spaces, gaps in meaning that invite the listener to pause, to lean in. The labyrinth is itself a silent space, winding, hidden, inward. The Minotaur does not speak. Ariadne's voice fades. Theseus, once out, says little. The noise of the world falls away in the depths of the spiral. What if that silence is not absence, but invitation? A sacred space into which meaning must be brought slowly, like a flame sheltered from the wind. The Minoans lived in rhythm with such quiet forces. Their world did not demand domination. It asked for balance, for alignment. Their deities were not distant sky fathers, but immediate presences, rising from the earth, pulsing in the sea, blooming in fields of poppies and grain. And in this context, the Minotaur is not a threat to be feared, but a keeper of that balance, a symbol that bridges instinct and intellect, the human and the animal, the sacred and the raw. He is the liminal being, born of divine union, cast into darkness, not because he is evil, but because the world forgot how to look at him. How many parts of ourselves do we exile in the same way? Parts too strong, too wild, too deep to fit the mold. In this light, the myth becomes a meditation on forgetting, on what happens when sacred truths are pushed into the shadows. The labyrinth is not only a place we enter, it is the mind itself, a maze of memory and meaning. And the Minotaur is the truth buried in its heart, distorted, feared, but vital. To slay it is to break the connection. To face it is to begin remembering. Across cultures, labyrinths are used in rituals of healing. They slow the body, quiet the thoughts, and bring the walker inward. And what waits at the center is not a prize, but a presence. Not something to take, but to feel. Perhaps the ancient ones knew this instinctively. They built these spaces not to trap, but to release. Not to confuse, but to clarify. The path is not random. It leads where it needs to go. Ariadne's thread becomes the path of memory, the link that holds us steady as we go inward, and the spiral, that ancient, universal form, is more than a symbol. It is the shape of life unfolding, of galaxies spinning, of the soul turning back to its source. In such a vision, nothing is linear. Death is not an end. The Minotaur is not a monster. He is a rite, a revelation. And the story we have told for centuries is only one layer of a much older truth, one that still waits, patient as stone, in the silent turns of the labyrinth. We return again to the palace of Knossos, not with swords, but with questions. Its broken columns and peeling frescoes seem to whisper, not what happened here, but what it meant. Archaeologists can name rooms, date pottery, trace trade routes, but meaning slips through the fingers like sand. It lives in symbols, in spaces, in what was never written down. And that is where the labyrinth hides its greatest secret. It is not a place of fear, but a process of becoming. The twisting corridors, the chambers without doors, the open-air light wells, they all shape experience. The seeker does not walk through them by accident. Each step is a choice, each turn a reflection. The further inward one moves, the more the mind must surrender, until only the breath remains. And perhaps at the center, something stirs. Ancient ritual often involved masks. To wear the face of another god, animal, ancestor, was not make-believe. It was transformation. The dancer became the bull. The priestess became the goddess. Through gesture and rhythm, the boundary between self and symbol dissolved. Perhaps the Minotaur was once such a figure, not a curse, but a mask worn in ceremony. A role taken on not to terrify, but to teach. Imagine a figure in the half-light, horned, silent, breathing slowly. They do not chase. They wait. You have entered their space. You have walked the spiral path. And now, in their gaze, you must ask, what have I come to see? What am I willing to let die, so something deeper might live? These are the questions the labyrinth asks, not in words, but in the shape of space, in the rhythm of steps, in the stillness of the center. The myth may tell of a monster slain and a girl betrayed, but the myth is a veil. Beneath it lies a deeper story, one of transformation, initiation, and the sacred reunion of lost parts. The myth ends with escape, but the labyrinth is not meant to be escaped. It is meant to be entered, again and again. Each time we carry something new, a question, a wound, a hope. Each time we leave something behind, a fear, a mask, a lie. And each time the Minotaur is there, not to block the way, but to ask if we are ready. So we walk, not with maps, but with memory, not with weapons, but with wonder. The thread is in our hands. The spiral opens before us. And in the quiet, ancient chambers of the self, the story continues. The beauty of the labyrinth lies not just in its design, but in what it evokes. A journey that cannot be rushed, a passage where the destination is not found in arrival, but in movement itself. There is no shortcut to the center, and no straight path outward. This is why the myth endures, not as a relic of the past, but as a living map of the inner world. For even now, in a world of speed and noise, something in us still longs for the slow, spiraling silence of the sacred. Knossos itself, though silent in stone, carries this imprint. Its rooms do not unfold logically. They shift, double back, open unexpectedly. It is a structure that confounds architects and historians alike. But perhaps that is the point. It wasn't made to be efficient. It was made to mirror something organic, timeless, inner, a place where the physical walk reflected the journey of the soul, from surface to depth, from confusion to clarity. The deeper we go, the more the old story falls away. The Minotaur is no longer the villain, Theseus no longer the hero. They become archetypes, masks worn by the psyche. The bull is strength, instinct, raw truth. The hero is the ego, determined to prove its worth. And between them stands the thread, the choice to walk in awareness, to move through the dark, not to conquer, but to learn. In the spiral, the initiate meets themselves. Each turn strips away another layer, the fear of not knowing, the need to dominate, the illusion of separation. What remains is not an answer, but a presence, a stillness, a becoming. The Minotaur, then, becomes the moment of truth, the presence that asks, not who are you, but are you ready to remember? Such questions were once at the center of initiation rites across the ancient world, not only in Crete, but in Egypt, in Sumer, in India. To walk into the dark was never punishment. It was privilege, a path reserved for those who wished to return to life with new eyes. The labyrinth, in this context, becomes not a building, but a doorway, between worlds, between selves. And Ariadne, she does not disappear. In later myths, she becomes immortal. Raised among the stars, she is crowned by Dionysus, whose own mysteries mirrored the spiral path descent into madness, into ecstasy, into death, and back. She becomes the thread itself. The connection between earth and sky, body and spirit, forgotten by the hero, but remembered by the cosmos. This shift in the myth is important. It reminds us that even as stories are rewritten, the truth can survive in symbol, and symbols cannot be erased. They wait, in dreams, in ruins. In the quiet longing that stirs when we hear the word labyrinth and feel something in us awaken. The labyrinth, in its truest sense, is not about escape. It is about return. A return to origins, to essence, to that place before language, before fear, where the self is whole. It's why walking the labyrinth can feel both ancient and intimate, like remembering something your bones already knew. The outer world dissolves, the turns become familiar, and the center holds a stillness that is not empty, but full. In Crete, this fullness was known through ritual. The sacred was woven into every part of life, not kept in temples alone, but alive in hearth and harvest, in water and fire. The bull, the spiral, the double axe, they were not just symbols, but languages. Languages of energy, movement, transformation. You didn't read them. You felt them. You danced them. You lived them. This embodied understanding is something we have largely forgotten. Modern life prizes the intellect, the visible, the quantifiable, but the Minoans knew another way. A way where knowledge came not from books, but from experience, from being immersed in space, in rhythm, in the turning wheel of the year. They listened not only with ears, but with bodies, with hearts attuned to something deeper. Knossos may have been their grandest expression of this listening. Its painted walls, its echoing halls, its hidden chambers, all crafted to draw the visitor inward, to shift perception. It was not a castle to defend, but a labyrinth to transform. Each fresco, each stairway, each painted horn was a step in a larger ritual, one designed not to impress, but to initiate. And the myth of the Minotaur, that lingering tale of beast and hero and betrayal, may have been a later attempt to grasp what could not be grasped, to explain a process that was never meant to be told, only lived. The Greeks, inheriting the ruins but not the rituals, turned the sacred into story. They gave the mystery a monster. They gave the ritual a hero, and in doing so, they made it safe. But the real power of the labyrinth lies in its danger. Not the danger of monsters, but the danger of change, of seeing yourself, of losing the false and finding the real. That is why it is guarded. That is why the thread matters. Not to escape, but to return bearing the truth. For those who seek the center, whether in Crete or in life, the Minotaur still waits, not as punishment, not as fear, but as a challenge, a question, a threshold. To pass through is not to kill, but to see, and in seeing, to remember who you truly are. What does it mean to truly remember? In the ancient world, memory was not just the act of recalling facts, it was sacred. The Greeks honored mnemosine as a tightness, the very embodiment of memory, and mother to the muses. Remembering was not simply mental, it was spiritual, a return to origin. And within the myth of the labyrinth, this act of remembering is embedded like a seed. To walk the labyrinth is to remember what the mind has forgotten, but the soul still knows. It is to re-enter a space where time folds inward, where the self sheds its masks, and where the deeper rhythm of being becomes audible once again. In the center of that space, where stillness reigns, the Minotaur is not a figure of terror. He is the guardian of truth. Not truth as doctrine, but truth as presence. What did the Minoans know that we have forgotten? Their civilization left no boastful inscriptions, no histories of conquest carved into stone, and yet their artistry endures. Their frescoes shimmer with movement, their pottery sings with spirals, and their temples breathe with light. Their legacy is not one of domination, but of devotion. To beauty, to rhythm, to the sacred unity of all things. The myth of the labyrinth, reframed, offers a radical reversal. The center is not to be conquered, but to be honored. The Minotaur, half man and half bull, represents not a punishment for transgression, but a reconciliation of duality. He is both wild and aware, instinct and intellect, nature and consciousness. He stands as the integration of opposites, a symbol of completeness. And Theseus, the sword-wielding hero, becomes a cautionary tale, a symbol of the mind that believes it must cut through mystery to understand it. In killing the Minotaur, he loses more than he gains. He forgets his promise to Ariadne. He forgets to change the sails. His return to Athens is not a triumph. It is a quiet tragedy, one that speaks not of a victory, but of a missed revelation. The labyrinth is not linear. It is cyclical. It is a mandala carved in stone, a message not in words, but in space. Each turn draws the seeker inward, deeper into presence, away from noise. And the thread, offered by the feminine, reminds us that movement through mystery must be done with connection, not with force. It is not enough to arrive. One must return and carry the sacred back into the world. Even now, the spiral finds us, in moments of stillness, in breath, in the turning of seasons. We walk modern mazes, finger paper labyrinths, dream of corridors we cannot map. And always, something waits at the center, not to block our path, but to hold a mirror. In the cool shade of the Knossos ruins, one can almost hear it, the soft hum of what once was. The air feels thick with presence, as if the stones remember. The grand staircase, with its layered flights and hidden platforms. The throne room, with its enigmatic basin. the light wells reaching up toward the sky. All these speak not just of design, but of intention. This was a space built for experience, not function, for transformation, not occupation. Archaeologists uncover artifacts and date walls, but there are things no spade can touch. The rituals, the initiations, the ceremonies that once gave breath to the labyrinths live now only in hints. A pattern here, a symbol there, a mural of blue-skinned dancers vaulting over a bowl. These fragments are not clues to a puzzle, but echoes of a music we've almost forgotten how to hear. Yet the myth endures because it still sings. In every age, the image of the labyrinth finds new meaning. Jung saw it as the journey of individuation, a descent into the unconscious. Campbell saw it in the hero's path. The venture inward, the facing of shadow, the return with a boon. But the Minoans, they may have simply walked it, not as metaphor, not as story, but as truth. Imagine walking it not to escape, not to fight, not to win, but to remember, to return to the part of yourself that has never left the center. The Minotaur, then, is not the final obstacle, but the guardian of that truth. He is there to ask, can you stand in your wholeness? Can you accept what you are in all your wild, sacred, human complexity? Such a question has no easy answer. That is why the labyrinth has no straight lines, why the path turns when we think it should open, why we sometimes feel lost when we are closest to the heart. The way is winding because truth is layered, and each time we walk it, we do so a little differently, because we are different. And when we emerge, if we walk with care, we carry something back. Not a trophy, not a prize, but a knowing, a softness, a thread. We remember that the sacred is not in some distant temple or forgotten past. It is in the steps we take, the breath we follow, the willingness to enter mystery with open hands. Knossos may crumble, stories may twist, but the labyrinth lives on, not in ruins, but in rhythm, waiting for us to walk again, not to conquer, but to listen. To listen, truly listen, is one of the most ancient acts of reverence. The labyrinth, too, listens. It hears each step, each breath, each pause. It reflects us back to ourselves in ways that words cannot. And in that silent listening, something shifts. We realize the story isn't only about the Minotaur or Ariadne or Theseus. It's about us, about what we choose to see and what we choose to forget. The creature at the center, half bull, half man, is the part of ourselves we banish because we don't know how to hold it. The part that rages, hungers, desires, the part that dreams, grieves, remembers. We call it a monster because it doesn't fit our structures, but it was never meant to be chained, only understood. In a world that prizes perfection, the Minotaur is wholeness. Not a neat story, but a true one. And so, the myth continues, not as a finished tale, but as an open spiral. Each generation walks it differently. The warrior wants to slay. The seeker wants to see. The wounded want to heal. The wise, perhaps, they simply sit at the center, beside the Minotaur, in silence. No fear, no judgment, just presence. If we could peel back the centuries, step again into the palace before it fell, what might we see? Women with painted skirts moving through torch-lit halls, musicians playing double pipes and drums, a sacred procession winding its way through frescoed corridors, and in the center, the chamber of initiation, not gilded, but humble. Stone, light, breath, a place not for spectacle, but for surrender. This was not a theater. It was a threshold. One entered as one person and left as another, but only if they truly walked, only if they did not run from the turns or the shadows, only if they faced the guardian within. Perhaps that is why the labyrinth draws us still, because it promises no easy answers, only depth. It asks for patience, for humility, for the courage to face what we carry in our deepest corners. And in return, it offers something rare, the chance to become whole. As with all ancient truths, the story of the labyrinth resists being pinned down. It shifts shape. It breathes. The Minotaur changes depending on who sees him. A monster to the fearful, a test to the brave, a teacher to the wise. And that fluidity is part of the power. It allows the myth to live, not in books, but in us. Even the ruins of Knossos seem to echo this shifting nature. Restored in parts, reconstructed by guesswork, it stands as both ancient site and modern interpretation. Some criticize the reconstructions as fantasy, but perhaps they are just another layer, another spiral. Even our mistakes become part of the path. The labyrinth doesn't demand perfection. It demands presence. In that presence, we begin to feel what the Minoans may have felt, that the sacred is not separate from the world. It's in the walls, the wind, the curve of the path, the space between two breaths. Their myths were not written, but lived. Their gods did not sit on thrones, but moved through the grain and the sea. And their rituals were not performances, but conversations with what lies beyond the veil. The Minotaur was not outside that world. He was part of it. And perhaps that's what made him terrifying to later generations. He could not be neatly defined. He belonged to both worlds, and thus to neither. In him, all divisions collapse, animal and human, sacred and profane, known and unknown. To look at him is to look into a mirror that shows more than a reflection. It shows what we hide. And Ariadne, the forgotten one, remains the keeper of the thread. Her wisdom is the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't demand to be seen, but is felt when everything else falls away. In every spiral walked, in every thread followed, she is there, not lost, not abandoned, but waiting for us to return with new eyes. The story of the labyrinth, then, is not finished. It can't be, because it lives wherever we dare to walk into the unknown, wherever we choose to face the thing we fear, not to destroy it, but to listen, to understand, to remember. And when we do, we carry something back. Not a sword, not a trophy, but a knowing, a softness, a sense that even the darkest center holds light, if we are willing to see it. The further one walks into the myth, the more it reveals not just a tale from long ago, but a pattern that pulses quietly beneath our modern lives. The labyrinth is everywhere, in the choices we make, in the thoughts we revisit, in the looping nature of our own emotions. It mirrors our internal world, the journey through grief, through healing, through awakening. And at the center of each of those spirals waits something we often fear to meet: ourselves. The Minotaur, then, is not only a symbol of ancient right, he is the confrontation we each must face. Not the enemy, but the question we spend our lives circling. What are we? What lies beneath the surface roles, beyond the polished mask? The beast in the center is not a threat to be killed. It is an invitation to be accepted. A part of us that has always been waiting to return. And perhaps that's why Ariadne's thread matters more than ever. It is not just a lifeline through stone hallsits, the act of holding on when the way becomes unclear. The thread is memory, intuition, connection. It's the part of us that knows how to return even when logic fails. It's soft but unbreakable, and in many ways, it is the most sacred thing in the myth. For while Theseus took the sword, it was Ariadne who gave him the means to find his way. While the story crowns him hero, it is she who understands the labyrinth. And in the most ancient layers of the myth, her presence is not one of abandonment, but of transformation. She does not vanish. She ascends. The stars crown her. The divine madness of Dionysus claims her not in tragedy, but in triumph. She becomes more than human. She becomes eternal. And perhaps the thread she gave Theseus was never meant to be physical. Perhaps it was always spiritual, a guide back to the self, a reminder of what he touched in that sacred center but could not yet understand. The myth doesn't tell us what Theseus saw when he faced the Minotaur. It only tells us that he raised his sword. But maybe, deep down, he saw something familiar in those dark eyes. Maybe he recognized the part of himself he had long denied. The tragedy of the story is not the monster in the maze. It is the misunderstanding of what the monster means. The belief that wholeness can be won through violence. That mystery must be conquered. That the sacred can be mastered with logic. But the labyrinth teaches otherwise. It teaches surrender, presence, listening, and only then, understanding. In the quiet that follows the myth, something else begins to rise, not a story, but a sensation, as though the walls of the labyrinth still hum in the dark, as though the earth beneath Crete still holds the breath of those who once walked with reverence and awe. The ruins may crumble, the names may fade, but the pattern remains. The spiral is eternal. The ancient Minoans seem to have understood something we are just beginning to rediscover: that true knowledge is not linear, that it moves in circles, cycles, rhythms, that it's not acquired, but revealed. They didn't leave behind manuals or doctrines. They left spaces, symbols, echoes, rooms that move like thoughts, light that filters in at certain times of day, casting long shapes across sacred floors. It was a temple of experience, a school for the soul. To walk Knossos today is to move through both time and meaning. Tourists walk the paths, read the signs, take photos, but some feel more. A heaviness in the air, a vibration in the stones, the sense that something is watching not with eyes, but with memory. The past isn't gone, it's just quieter. And in those quiet places, the story waits. The Minotaur doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His silence is the language of all that has been buried, misunderstood, exiled. He is the power of what we turn away from. the raw instinct, the dream we abandoned, the scream we silenced. But in his presence, there is no judgment, only truth. He does not wish to destroy us, only to be seen. And when we do see him fully, without fear, something within us softens. The maze begins to shift. The endless turns feel less confusing. The thread pulls gently. We remember that we are not here to conquer life, but to walk it, to feel each turn, to meet what waits in the dark, and to emerge not victorious, but whole. Ariadne's gift was not just the thread, but the reminder that mystery does not mean danger, that darkness is not the same as evil, that the labyrinth, with all its unknowns, is the most sacred place of all, because it holds what we truly are, beneath all stories, roles, and fears. And so, step by step, we return. The way out is the way we came in. Only now, we walk with eyes that see, with hearts that remember, and with a thread that connects us to everything we once thought was lost. There is a reason the labyrinth continues to echo through time. It is not just a story or a structure. It is a symbol that resonates across cultures and epochs, because it reflects the structure of the psyche itself. We are each a maze of thoughts, emotions, instincts, and dreams. And somewhere, at the center of all of it, waits the silent truth, the part of us untouched by fear or time. In many ancient traditions, descent is the first step in awakening. The hero, or seeker, must journey downward into the underworld, the cave, the darkness, before they can return with insight. The labyrinth, carved into the rock of Crete and into the mythic memory of humankind, is one of the oldest maps of that descent. But unlike the hero's path that ends in conquest, the spiral of the labyrinth ends in stillness. The victory is not in slaying the beast. It is in recognizing that there was never a beast at all. The Minotaur is our projection, a mirror for all we exile desires, our rage, our untamed creativity. But he does not rage blindly. He waits, bound in the dark, misunderstood, misnamed. His prison is not the labyrinth. It is our perception, and the blade we raise against him is the blade we use against ourselves. To enter the labyrinth with reverence is to walk toward integration, to reclaim what was lost, to recognize the Minotaur, not as a curse, but as a companion. He is the ancient voice that says, "You are more than your roles. You are not just light. You are not just shadow. You are all of it." And in that realization, the walls of the maze seem less confining. The way becomes clearer. The Minoans may have understood this in ways that surpass our current models of knowledge. They built their sacred spaces not to dominate nature, but to flow with it. Their palaces aligned with solstices. Their rooms captured light at specific times. Their art reflected movement and grace, not power. They sought balance, harmony, union. And the labyrinth in this world was not a prison. It was a path home. Even now, labyrinths are used in healing rituals, in hospitals, in schools, not as curiosities, but as sacred tools. People walk them slowly, tracing ancient wisdom with their feet. The spiral calms the nervous system. It softens the mind. It opens something forgotten. And in that moment, the ancient myth breathes again. The heart of the labyrinth is not a place. It is a state, a return to essence. And it is no coincidence that the oldest spiral forms found in art and architecture often appear in places of ceremony, burial, or rebirth. These symbols are not decorations. They are invitations to turn inward, to follow the curve of becoming, to let the ego unravel, just enough for something deeper to rise. The Minotaur guards this threshold because he represents the last defense of the old self. He is the roar that comes before surrender, the resistance before transformation. But he does not attack. He waits. He waits for you to come close enough to see him as he truly is, a part of you asking to be brought back into the whole. When the myth says Theseus killed the Minotaur, it speaks in the language of separation, but older myths, quieter ones, speak instead of union, of embrace, of transformation through acceptance. Perhaps in the oldest telling, Theseus did not slay the Minotaur. He wept with him, held him, listened, and by doing so, changed himself forever. This kind of change is what the labyrinth teaches. It is not loud, it does not flash or shout. It comes slowly, step by step, through each curve of the path, through each breath taken with awareness. It comes when we are willing to be lost, when we let go of the need to solve, to win, to explain. The labyrinth is not a puzzle. It is a presence. And in that presence, the symbols of the myth bloom with new meaning. Ariadne's thread becomes the thread of compassion. The sword becomes discernment. The labyrinth becomes the body. And the Minotaur becomes the heart draw, honest, waiting. What once seemed like a legend becomes a map, not to treasure, but to truth. Even the abandonment of Ariadne can be reimagined. Perhaps she was never left behind. Perhaps she transcended the tale entirely, became the thread itself, the wisdom woven through time, found wherever someone dares to walk a path without knowing where it leads, and keeps going anyway. The spiral is not meant to end. It flows ever inward and outward again, a rhythm as old as breath, as steady as the tide. And somewhere, beneath the dust of history and the noise of conquest, the Minotaur still waits, not with anger, but with patience, knowing that one day we will stop running and begin listening. To listen in the way the labyrinth asks is not the same as hearing. It is deeper. It is not passive, but participatory, an act of surrender rather than control. Within the winding halls of Knossos, there may have once echoed chants not meant for the ears alone, but for the spirit, for awakening the inner listener. The Minoans, through their rituals, were not seeking to command the sacred, but to commune with it. In such a setting, the Minotaur becomes not only a guardian, but a channel, a conduit between realms. Just as the labyrinth moves between light and shadow, outer and inner, so too does the Minotaur bridge the animal and divine within us. His very form, neither fully one thing nor the other, is the message. That we are not here to separate, but to integrate. That truth lies in the union of opposites, not in their division. So why has this myth endured in such a distorted form? Why do we continue to tell it as a tale of horror and escape? Perhaps because it's easier to believe that the thing at the center is a monster than to admit it is a mirror. It is easier to cheer for the slayer than to question what he truly destroyed. Theseus returns to Athens. Yes, but he forgets. He forgets the sails. He forgets the woman who guided him. And perhaps he forgets what he saw at the center. The sea swallows his father, Aegeus, in sorrow. And so the Aegean is named, not for triumph, but for grief. The myth leaves us with victory wrapped in loss, memory wrapped in myth, and a truth buried beneath layers of misinterpretation. But the labyrinth does not judge. It waits, always. And now, perhaps more than ever, we are beginning to turn back toward the spiral, back toward the thread. In our age of constant movement, people are again seeking spaces where the mind can slow, the breath can soften, the path can unfold without pressure. Labyrinths are appearing again, not just as symbols, but as spaces to walk, to feel, to remember. They do not promise answers, they promise presence. Each turn echoes a question. Are you still here? Are you willing to keep walking? Will you meet what waits within? And for those who do, the silence at the center is not empty. It is full of memory, of meaning, of the ancient voice that whispers, "You were never lost. You are always becoming." Becoming is the sacred act at the heart of all ancient rites, not becoming something new, but becoming fully what you already are. The labyrinth does not change you by adding, but by taking away what is not yours. The roles, the noise, the masks. As you walk, they fall behind, until at the center, you stand with nothing but your breath, your heartbeat, your truth. This is the sacred confrontation the Minoans may have enacted in their ceremonies, not fear, but unveiling. The initiate was not expected to defeat something, but to see something. To feel the earth beneath bare feet, the firelight dancing across stone, the pulse of drums echoing like a second heartbeat. And through this, a door would open not in the walls, but in the soul. In that space, the Minotaur is no longer alone. He is no longer misunderstood. He becomes the brother of the seeker, the reflection of their own sacred wildness. They do not destroy him. They walk with him. They honor him. And then they leave the labyrinth, not as victors, but as vessels of something greater. And perhaps this is what Ariadne understood all along, that the thread was not to escape the labyrinth, but to return to the world with memory intact, to carry the truth of the spiral into the straight lines of everyday life, to be a bridge. She is the unsung weaver of the myth, the one who never forgets. Her presence echoes through time in every quiet act of guidance, every whispered encouragement in the dark, every instinct that tells us where to turn when we feel lost. She is the voice that says, "Hold on, keep walking, you are not alone." And the labyrinth, once feared as a place of entrapment, is revealed for what it truly is: a sanctuary, a crucible, a sacred container in which transformation can safely unfold, not through force, but through rhythm, through breath, through presence. We do not walk the labyrinth to escape the world. We walk it to return to it differently, with clearer sight, with steadier hearts, with the wild grace of those who have faced their own depths and come back whole. And even now, beneath the stones of Knossos, beneath the layers of history and story, the spiral remains, not broken, not buried, but waiting. And so we arrive at the spiral's final arcs, not to close the journey, but to feel its deepening, For the labyrinth does not end where it began. Though the path circles back to the entrance, the walker returns changed, not remade, but revealed. The outer world remains the same, yet everything is different. The sky, the trees, even the sound of one's own breath feels fuller, quieter, more true. The myth of the Minotaur was never about the triumph of man over beast. It was about the reunion of what had been divided, the bull and the human, the instinct and the reason, the sacred and the earthly, all reconciled in the act of seeing, of embracing. And that embrace is not always gentle. To look into the eyes of the Minotaur is to feel the full weight of one's forgotten self, the wildness, the hunger, the ache to be whole. The Minoans may have honored this through ritual, not story, through action, not word. They built their world with this understanding etched into every surface. A world of balance, of spirals in clay, of horned altars and moon-aligned sanctuaries. Their cities were not fortresses, but invitations. Their myths were not recited, they were danced. Perhaps that's why the labyrinth resists interpretation. It was never meant to be read. It was meant to be walked, to be felt. Its lessons live in the turning, in the slowness, in the silence at the center. There, the Minotaur waits not with rage, but with remembrance. And when we kneel before him, when we offer no sword, but simply presence, something happens. Something sacred. He disappears, or merges, or smiles. The stories differ, but the feeling is always the same. Peace, not the peace of escape, but the peace of reunion. The kind of stillness that comes only after long walking, deep seeing, honest, remembering. And when we return, when we step once again into the light of day, we carry that stillness with us, in our steps, in our speech, in the way we see the world. We no longer need the thread, because the spiral now lives inside us. We have become it. To become the spiral is to walk with wisdom that doesn't need to speak. It is to move through life with softness and strength intertwined. To no longer see parts of the self as enemies to conquer, but as pieces to embrace. The Minotaur, once feared, becomes a symbol of depth, of power that is rooted in vulnerability, in presence. And Ariadne, the overlooked, the left behind. She is revealed not as abandoned, but as ascending. She was never the one who needed rescuing. She was the one who knew the path. The thread was hers. The insight was hers. The love she offered was not romantic. It was mythic, eternal, a reflection of the divine feminine that guides through the dark, that sees the whole, that never stops holding space for the return. It is her spirit that moves through every spiral ever walked, her thread that hums in every moment we choose awareness over reaction, compassion over fear. She lives not in tragedy, but in transformation. Crowned by stars, her story arcs beyond the myth, into every quiet act of remembering. As for Knossos, the stone walls whisper still, the murals flake, but the colors persist. The ruins crumble, but the pattern remains. The labyrinth cannot be destroyed, because it was never just physical. It is a map of becoming, a geometry of the soul. Its corridors are alive in us, in the questions we carry, in the paths we trace, through dream and longing. We may never know exactly what rituals took place there. We may never decipher all the symbols or recreate the full ceremony, but perhaps we don't need to. Perhaps the act of walking, of listening, of honoring is enough. The myth continues not in reconstruction, but in remembering. And in that remembering, we begin to feel the presence of the sacred not just in Crete, not just in myth, but everywhere. In the wind, in the hush before sleep, in the gentle return to a center that was never far, only forgotten. The Minotaur is not dead. He never was. He stands still at the heart of the spiral, waiting not to be feared, but to be seen, to be understood, to be loved. And when he is, the labyrinth breathes again, alive, as it always was. And so the spiral deepens again. The closer we come to the final turns of this long walk through myth, memory, and mystery, the more we understand that the story never truly ends. The labyrinth is not a closed structure. It opens inward, and once we've walked it with presence, we carry it everywhere, in decisions, in relationships, in the quiet spaces between thoughts. The Minoan labyrinth is no longer confined to the ruins of Knossos. It breathes in us. Every time we choose to meet what we've pushed away, every time we pause instead of react, every time we hold our pain gently instead of burying it, we are walking that ancient path. The Minotaur is there not to stop us, but to stand beside us as we face what's real. There's a quiet revolution in this kind of seeing. It's not about power in the conventional sense. It's not about slaying dragons or building empires. It's about integration, healing, wholeness. The power that comes from no longer being at war with yourself. And what happens when enough people begin to live that way? When the spiral becomes not only a personal journey, but a shared one? The labyrinth, after all, was not a solitary space. It was communal, ceremonial. It held the breath of many, the steps of the young and the old, the prayers of those seeking clarity, initiation, or peace. Imagine a culture that revered the spiral instead of the straight line, that valued the inward journey as much as the outward success, that honored the sacred in symbols, in rhythms, in silence. That is the world the Minoans hinted at, a world not lost, but waiting. And Ariadne? She walks that world still. Her thread stretches through time, through the noise of history, through every retelling of the myth. She was never meant to be abandoned. She was always meant to be remembered, not as a footnote to a hero's journey, but as the guide, the holder of the thread, the weaver of paths. The story, then, does not end with Theseus sailing away. It continues with us, with every footfall on the spiral path, with every breath taken in stillness, with every choice to face the Minotaur not as a monster, but as the missing piece. In this remembering, the labyrinth reveals its deepest gift belonging, not to a place or a role or a belief, but to oneself. The spiral is a return to the body, to the breath, to the sacred presence that has always been waiting at the center. It asks nothing but honesty. It offers nothing but the chance to be fully here. And that is perhaps what makes it so radical. Even today, the world still teaches us to move fast, to stay busy, to climb, to conquer. But the labyrinth whispers otherwise. Slow down. Listen. Be still. The wisdom you seek is already within, not in the center as a destination, but in every step toward it. There is grace in that, a kind of soft power that cannot be stolen or sold. It grows with each turn of the path, and it deepens when we no longer try to name everything, when we let the myth speak through symbol, movement, silence, the way it always has. What remains of Knossos may never give us all the answers. The palace will crumble further, the colors will fade, but the spiral endures, because it lives not in what we can touch, but in how we walk, how we listen, how we return. And perhaps, just perhaps, the greatest truth hidden in the myth of the Minotaur is that the monster was never real. What was real was the journey, the mirror, the breath held in the dark, and the love that waited just beyond fear, the love that could not be killed, only forgotten. But the spiral remembers, and when we walk it, so do we. What does it mean to come to the end of the labyrinth, knowing it was never about reaching a destination, but about becoming? The myth, long misunderstood, opens fully only here at the edge of return. It is not Theseus's sword that we carry out, but Ariadne's thread, not as a trail of escape, but as a thread of wisdom woven into the very act of remembrance. By now, the Minotaur has changed shape. He is no longer the image given to us by stories of fear and punishment. He stands as an ally, a protector of thresholds, a teacher who speaks in silence. He tells us that what we feared most was never meant to be defeated, only seen and welcomed back into the light. And the labyrinth, far from being a prison, becomes a place of reunion, a home for all the fragmented parts of the self to return. Each spiral turn draws us deeper into wholeness, into a knowing that does not require logic or explanation. The body understands, the heart recognizes, the breath remembers. This is what the Minoans may have known when they built Knossos, that a palace could be a temple, that walls could be prayers, that mystery was not to be solved but honored. Their civilization, built on beauty, rhythm, and sacred motion, leaves behind not just ruins but a template for how to live in harmony with the unseen. A culture without massive armies, without tales of conquest, yet rich in expression, art, and symbol. It's no wonder their myth became distorted. The world that followed could not understand a people who danced with bulls instead of conquering them, who centered their lives around the spiral instead of the sword. But the spiral cannot be erased. It is the pattern of breath, of blood, of galaxies. It pulses beneath language. It is why we return to these myths again and again, not to hear them, but to feel them. To remember that before there were heroes and monsters, there was something softer, deeper, older. And now, as the spiral unwinds, we carry this knowing forward not as knowledge, but as rhythm, as presence, as the ability to walk the uncertain path with steady heart, knowing that the center is not far. It is always beneath our next breath. Ariadne's thread does not lead outward, it stretches onward, into life, into the everyday moments where the myth becomes real. It winds through grief and joy, through failure and grace. It reminds us that sacred transformation isn't something that happens only in temples or dreams. It happens wherever we meet ourselves with truth. To live mythically is not to retreat from the world, but to re-enter it fully, changed, quieted, alive. This is the final gift of the labyrinth. Not escape, not heroism, but return. Return with eyes that see beyond appearances, with a heart that does not flinch from shadow, with a soul that has danced in the depths and come back whole. The Minotaur no longer guards the center. He is the center, and he is not alone. He is you, the part of you that held pain and power in equal measure, the part that waited patiently for your courage. And now, you no longer need to fear him. You have walked the path. You have touched the truth. Knossos may someday fall completely to time. Its stones may scatter. Its frescoes fade. But what it represented, that sacred spiral, that inner journey, that deep remembering, will never die. Because it lives in those who walk with presence, who pause, who listen, who breathe into the space between stories and find there not monsters, but mirrors. And Ariadne, ever present, ever patient, remains, not as a lost girl in a myth of abandonment, but as the thread itself, the golden line that binds us to truth, to mystery, to each other. The spiral is her gift, and the courage to walk it is ours. So here we are, the last turn of the spiral, the final breath of the myth, and yet nothing truly ends. The labyrinth teaches that every ending is simply another return, another invitation. The story wins, but never closes. It lives not in pages or ruins, but in presence, in each choice to walk inward rather than away, to feel instead of fear. The Minotaur no longer stands as a warning. He has become the guardian of authenticity. He is the force we meet when we stop running from ourselves. His silence is not ominous. It is sacred. He waits because the journey must be walked slowly, with heart. No one can carry us to the center. No one can tell us what we'll find. That is the truth of transformation. It is always personal and always universal. And what of the labyrinth itself? We now know it was never a maze. It was never a trap. It wasn't a mirror of nature, of the cosmos, of the soul. Its curves echo the movement of wind, water, time. Its path is not made to confuse, but to bring depth. It does not resist us. It reflects us. Every turn is a question. Will you keep going? Will you trust the path? Will you meet yourself fully? The Minoans, through their art and their silence, remind us that sacred wisdom doesn't shout. It sings softly. It hums in the walls. It lives in the ritual of movement. The flicker of torchlight, the offering laid at a forgotten altar. They left no manifestos, no monuments to power, only spirals, only symbols, and that is their greatest gift. Because now, long after their names have vanished into the sea of time, their message remains. Walk slowly, turn inward, trust the spiral, face what waits, remember what was forgotten, and return carrying the thread not as a trophy, but as a lifeline for yourself, for the world. You were never meant to slay the Minotaur. You were meant to understand him, to forgive him, to welcome him back into the circle. And as you emerge again and again from the spiral's sacred center, you do not leave the labyrinth behind. You become it. The path lives in your breath, your voice, your stillness. The thread stretches through your life. You are Ariadne. You are Theseus. You are the Minotaur. You are the walker, the watcher, the way. The labyrinth was never hiding a monster. It was waiting for you. You've walked the spiral, not to escape the world, but to return to it differently. What you've just heard is not a story with a simple ending, but a reflection of the journey we all take, again and again, through uncertainty, through silence, toward something deep and timeless inside. The Minotaur was never a monster. He was a part of us, waiting. And the labyrinth? It's not far away. It's right here, in breath, in memory, in every quiet choice, to return to the center of who we are. Thank you for walking this path. Sleep well, and may you carry the thread gently with you, wherever you go.